This chart shows Manchester's top 26 most expensive streets, ranked by total value of all property sales completed. Each horizontal bar represents one street. The length of the bar shows the combined value of every property transaction that took place on that street during the period covered. So this isn't an average price per property, it's the total amount of money that actually changed hands on each street. That distinction is important because a street can rank highly either because it has very expensive individual properties or because it has lots of high value transactions, or in some cases a combination of both. If we start at the top, one street stands out immediately. New Wakefield Street is way ahead of the rest. Its bar is significantly longer than any other on the chart. That tells us this street has an exceptionally high concentration of transaction value, likely driven by large developments, multiple high-price sales, or new build schemes completing in bulk. Moving down the chart, you then see streets like Chorley Road, Owen Street and Chatsworth Road. These streets still show very high total transaction values, but at a noticeably lower level than in the very top outlier. This suggests that they are strong and high-activity streets, with either consistent turnover, higher than average prices, or both. As you continue down the list, the bars gradually shorten. Wilbraham Road, Kennedy Street, Cromwell Range and Lakeside Rise still represent multi-million pound markets, but with less overall volume than the top tier. What's interesting here is that many of these streets are well-known areas, places with established demand, strong rental markets or prestige value. This chart is effectively showing where the capital is concentrating, not just where prices are high on paper. Lower down the chart, streets like Grey Street, St John Street, Ringlet Drive and Walden Road still appear because they've crossed the threshold to be in the top 26, but their total transaction value is noticeably smaller. That might affect fewer transactions, lower average prices, or simply quieter streets in terms of market activity. It must be emphasised that this data was for 2024, so what this visual really gives you is a liquidity and concentration map. It tells you where money is actively moving, which streets see repeated high value sales, and where demand is deep enough to support significant transaction volume. For investors, this can highlight prime micro markets. For agents, it points to streets with strong turnover potential, and for developers, it helps identify areas where the market has already proven its ability to absorb high value stock. Rather than relying on averages or broad postcode area, this chart zooms right into the street level, showing exactly where Manchester's most valuable pockets of property activity are concentrated. It's a simple visual, but it carries a lot of insight. Not just how expensive properties are, but where real money is actually flowing in the Manchester housing market. This visual is an alluvial diagram showing how different property types break down into freehold and leasehold ownership. On the left-hand side, you have the property types. They're abbreviated as such. O means other, D for detached, S for semi-detached, F for flats, and T for terraced houses. On the right-hand side, you see the two tenure groups, F for freehold and L for leasehold. The key thing to understand here is the thickness of the flows. Each band flowing from left to right represents properties moving from a type into a tenure, and the thicker the band, the higher the number of properties in that category. So you're not looking at percentages, you're looking at relative volume. Let's start with flats because this is where the pattern is most obvious. The vast majority of flats flow into leasehold. That band is thick, dominant and visually overwhelming compared to the freehold flow. This reflects the reality of the UK housing market. Flats are typically sold as leasehold, especially in urban areas and apartment blocks. There is a small flow from flats into freehold, but it's minor by comparison, so the takeaway here is simple. If you're dealing with flats, you're overwhelmingly dealing with leasehold. Now, if you look at terraced houses, here the pattern flips. Most terraced properties flow into freehold, with a much thinner stream going into leasehold. This tells us that terraced housing in the UK is primarily freehold, with leasehold terrace houses being the exception rather than the rule. The same pattern shows up with semi-detached properties. Again, the flow is towards freehold, with a smaller but visible leasehold component. So semis are mostly freehold, but leasehold semis do exist, especially in certain regions or newer developments. Looking at detached houses, the picture is even clearer. Detached properties are overwhelmingly freehold. The leasehold flow is extremely thin by comparison. This reinforces the expectation most buyers and investors already have. Detached homes are almost always owned outright. Finally, there's the other category. This typically includes things like maisonettes, mixed-use properties or unusual classifications. Here the split between freehold and leasehold is more mixed. which makes sense given how varied the category is. So when you step back and look at the whole of the diagram, a very clear story emerges. It may be obvious to most, but it's always best to check the data, and this does prove that most flats are leasehold and terraced, semi-detached and detached houses are mostly freehold. What this chart does really well is show this at a glance without needing tables, percentages or long explanations. It visually reinforces how property type strongly determines tenure, which has major implications for investors, developers and buyers. Tenure affects everything from service charges and ground rent to financing, resale value and long-term control. And this diagram makes it very clear where those tenure risks and characteristics actually sit in the housing stock. It's a simple visual, but it captures one of the most important structural realities of the UK property market. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and let me know if I can help you in your property journey, either with detailed property analytics or my extensive experience as a landlord. Thanks.